Good evening, everybody, and welcome to another Azure Thursday. For the first time from our brand new studio.
And how awesome is that?
Yeah, it looks really professional. You should see behind the screens, right? And there's a lot of technical stuff right there, and it looks great. Welcome. And we have some great sessions tonight. So maybe you want to tell something about that?
Yeah, definitely. So tonight, as you all probably already saw on the agenda, we have Sarah Lee doing an awesome session about all her great work at Octopus Deploy. And then we have Kendall Roden later on, giving us an introduction to containerized apps in Azure. So I'm looking forward to both sessions.
Yeah, me too.
Do we still have to introduce some of the house rules, or are we just ready to bring on our first guest?
I think we're ready to bring in Sarah. Yeah.
Okay, so Sarah, look,
hello.
Technology is working for us.
Yeah.
So for us, it's going to be a bit awkward trying to figure out if we should look in the camera or just be more direct talking with you. So if I don't make eye contact, that's just because this whole setup is pretty new so far. Okay. But before I start fully introducing you, Sarah, let me first congratulate you on becoming an Azure MVP.
Yeah.
Because I think most of the audience saw the announcement on Twitter, but it's awesome to have you back in a very active role in the community again.
Yeah, thank you. It was pretty surreal to get that email earlier in the week, so it's still trying to sink in. So thank you to everybody that's wished me well. I think I got back to everybody.
Awesome. So quick introduction. Sarah, I think most of us already know you because you're very active on social media. Previously worked for Microsoft, and as of October last year, you transitioned to Octopus Deploy, and I think you're doing some awesome work there. Jorrit already confessed that Octopus Deploy basically was like your first love.
You could say it like that. Yeah, I've worked with Octopus Deploy for quite a while, and one of my previous employers. Now it's all Azure DevOps, but I'm really interested if we, about your story, if we should move back to Octopus or what the benefits are. So yeah, I'm looking really particularly looking forward for this one. So
no pressure, Sarah.
No, definitely
no pressure at all. Because I wanted to ask you one more question, which is not technical focused, but I noticed in your own introduction you mentioned something about curling. And being one of your hobbies. And that got me so interested because that's one of the very fascinating sports that I love to watch, even recently at the Olympics.
It's something I took up 30 years ago. I'm aging myself very much here. But yeah, I've been curling as a hobby for quite a while now. So it was good to see the British or Scottish teams, because they were all Scottish, win the Olympic gold and silver medals recently at the Olympics. So yeah, it's been a good time for the sport.
Yeah, definitely. So that immediately made me even more excited about catching up with you today. Sorry,
I was
going
to say I'm actually anxiously waiting a parcel because I ordered new curling shoes, and I'm hoping they arrive tomorrow in time for a game that I'm playing tomorrow night. So
definitely.
Right.
So if there's any possibility they're streaming the game, is there like a URL that you want us to promote, or?
They used to, actually, my ice rink had a webcam, like a really poor quality webcam, but they took it down because their broadband just couldn't cope with it and people were complaining. So unfortunately not. But if you ever do get the chance to have a go at curling, I would highly recommend everybody have a go. It's great fun, and it's actually a really great team building exercise. I've taken previous colleagues and teams on a fun night out having a go at curling, and it's always fun. So definitely have a go if you ever get the chance to have a go at it.
Well, I am very fortunate to live up north in the Netherlands, where curling is very actively one of the sports in our region. So I'll definitely have a go at it, especially after this great introduction. So,
Awesome.
so with that, a bit personal information. Thank you for that. I would love to give you the floor.
Yep.
And get blown away by all the cool Octopus Deploy options that are coming our way.
Awesome. So I'll just start sharing my screen. So hopefully
Yes,
you're
please.
all seeing that, or Henk in the background is doing his magic. So tonight I want to talk about Octopus Deploy and Azure. And I've entitled the talk When Superpowers Combine, because I think Azure is a superpower, and I also think that Octopus Deploy is a superpower. So hopefully at the end of this talk, you have the same opinion of me. So as a team, we're saying, my name is Sarah Lean and I am a techie in Scotland. I have been in the IT industry for about 17 odd years now, and I've come from that sector that's the IT pro or the sysadmin or the operations team or infrastructure engineer. So my background is definitely not developer. So trying to almost adapt to some of the things that are happening nowadays is quite interesting, and that's where I often tell my story from. So that's the angle I'm going to be coming at this evening's talk from. As I usually attend meetups, I like to bring a bit of Scotland with me, but unfortunately, as I can't be there with you this evening and can't bring you some of the goodies from Scotland, I wanted to share a fun picture of a Highland cow, and I actually think this is quite relevant to a lot of IT engineers, regardless of your job title, because we have to be very adaptable. We have to learn new technologies, we have to adapt to our customers' needs, we have to adapt to our business demands on us and the IT equipment. And the Highland cow, or the Heelan cow as we call it here in Scotland, is a very adaptable animal. So the Highland cow can live outside all year round because it has this great coat or two coats of fur that help it keep warm and dry during the winter, and keep it cool during the summer as well. And they can adapt to either living on like flat grasslands, or they can live on some of the hills in Scotland. So I think it's quite apt sharing a picture of the Highland cow, because they are a very adaptable animal, and as IT professionals, we are all adaptable as well. Plus, it's a pretty cool picture that I took a few years ago of the stocksman loving his animal and congratulating it for winning some prizes. So that's just a little bit of Scotland being shared with you this evening. Now, before we kind of get started, I do have a bit of an interactive question for you all. So I want to know a bit about whether you know what Octopus Deploy is or not. I've been at Octopus, as Esther was saying, for 6 months now, and I knew a little bit about it because my manager actually is based here in Scotland. Being an Australian company and having two of us, or a few of us, but based in Scotland, is quite interesting. But that's another story for this evening. So what I would love you to do is, if you could head over to Slido and just answer the question that I have on screen, and maybe we'll pick it up later on and it can adapt to what's actually going to be said this evening, and I can try and adapt the presentation depending on if you all know about Octopus or you don't know about Octopus. So yeah, I'd love you to take a quick few seconds and interact with me this evening. Being said that, if you do have questions, please post them wherever you're watching, and I'm sure we'll grab them at the end with the team and we can address them. So definitely ask your questions, because I'd love to have them as well this evening. Now, this evening we're going to be talking about an imaginary pet shop called Octo Pet Shop, and we love to talk about this here at Octopus Deploy. Now, this pet shop has an online presence, they have a web store, but they're having some issues with it that we're going to try and solve with some of the cool technology that I've mentioned already this evening. So one of the issues that they have is that their online shop is not stable. There's a lot of issues, a lot of outages, and mainly that's because the server is actually a physical server that resides inside the pet shop. So there's occasionally times where it will get unplugged, it will get dusty, someone has to come and clean it out, and it's just getting old. It is a legacy bit of hardware that they want to get rid of in the pet shop and clear up some space under their desk. The other challenge that they have at the moment is that they don't have a test environment. So if they're trying to make changes to that online shop, they're pushing to production, which causes some outages because they have no test environment to test those code changes, first of all. And it also is causing some issues with customers when they push out a new functionality that doesn't quite go right or the customer isn't quite used to. So those are the challenges that we want to solve, and how I'm going to solve those challenges this evening is with a few bits of technology. Now, the first one is to introduce Azure as the platform. We're going to replace that PC, that bit of hardware that lives in their pet shop, and we're going to put all of that infrastructure inside Azure. And that will give us a few benefits that we'll talk about later on. Now, I'm also going to introduce Azure DevOps. And again, this is where we're going to store the source code, and that's going to be that single source of truth for us. It's also going to help us build the application code ready for deployment to our infrastructure that we've got on Azure. And last but no means least, we're going to introduce Octopus Deploy to try and help deploy that build, that software, that code out to our website in a repeatable manner, in a consistent manner as well, and take some of the complexity out deploying to our web apps as well. Now, hopefully a lot of you will know what Azure is. Being Azure Thursday, I'm sure a few of you are familiar, but for anybody that isn't familiar with Azure, I always like to show this slide. It is a bit out of date, but it just shows you the sheer scale of Azure in terms of what it can offer you. And there's lots of services that aren't even included on this slide now. Azure is a massive ecosystem. It's a massive ecosystem of compute, of database, of monitoring, of content delivery, a whole host of things, identity, security, and it can be really flexible in terms of allowing you to grow as a business. And you don't have to be a massive enterprise organization either to take advantage of it. You can be a small startup, you can be a small shop like Octopet Shop and have a small need and be able to host your needs there in a hopefully cost-effective manner if you've architected your design correctly. So that's why we're choosing Azure, because it makes sense from Octopet Shop's point of view to provide us with a new environment to actually host our infrastructure or hardware. It is hopefully going to be cost effective, where we'll be able to spin up services when we need them and pull them down when we don't need them. And it'll hopefully build that reliability as well into it. Now, as I said, the second part of the plan with Octopet Shop is to use Azure DevOps. Now, in a simplistic way, Azure DevOps is a DevOps tool that helps you automate your source code and your deployment of your software or your code as well. When we look at Azure DevOps, it offers you a lot of benefits. Again, I'm sure a few of you will be familiar with it this evening and not need me to tell you the benefits of it. But again, for those that aren't aware of it, it can help you with the collaboration of code development. You can have that single source of truth. We'll be using the Azure repos for Octopet Shop's source code. We'll be holding all of it there, and that will be that single source of truth for any developer, for any infrastructure engineer that comes along and needs to interact with the Octopet Shop website. We'll also be using Azure boards to actually plan out our work. So to log any tasks that may need to be carried out, any improvements for the website. We'll be logging any bugs, any issues, and just having that to-do list where we can all have, again, an interactive view so that we can report back to the customer of Octopet Shop, or they can even actually come here and interact with the Azure DevOps board as well and have a look at what's happening and just discuss the plans going forward. And last but not least, we'll be using the Azure pipelines to actually build and test that source code that we have for the website. And then we'll be handing that off and what it builds off to Octopus Deploy. Because there is great integration with Octopus Deploy and Azure DevOps, the tools work in harmony together. Azure DevOps, Octopus Deploy all work very well together. There's a seamless integration path, and it's not abrasive when we actually try and join these three services together. Now, I asked you earlier on if you knew about Octopus Deploy, and having a look at the results, we've got a mixed bag of whether people have heard about it or not. So hopefully I'll be able to tailor what I'm about to talk about and some of the benefits of Octopus Deploy based on this survey. So thank you to everybody that took the few minutes to fill in that quick survey for us this evening. So what is an Octopus Deploy? Octopus Deploy is a deployment tool. When we think about DevOps, we often split it up into your CI, your continuous improvement, or your continuous delivery, CD pipeline process. We'll be using Azure DevOps for that CI part of the pipeline, and then we'll be using Octopus Deploy for the CD part of that deployment of our actual application, and how we put that onto the website and the infrastructure there as well. Now, we'll be using Azure with Octopus Deploy, but Octopus Deploy is capable of interacting with any of your infrastructure, whether you're using Windows Server, Linux Server, if you're using AWS, GCP, Kubernetes, Helm, ECS, the list goes on where you can deploy to. Octopus Deploy can take anything that you're using, whether that be legacy or whether that be modern infrastructure, whether that be some of the cooler technologies, things like Kubernetes that I don't know much about, and you can use Octopus Deploy to help you actually orchestrate all of that. It's not just your source code, it's not just your applications that you can build with Octopus Deploy. We can also deploy your infrastructure as well, and that'll I'll be talking about that later on and during the demo as well. Now, because Octopus Deploy just focuses on the CD part of your CI/CD pipeline, we have key integration with a lot of those CI servers that you are hopefully familiar with and maybe using already. Jenkins, GitHub Actions, TeamCity, Azure DevOps, the list goes on in terms of what we can integrate with. So there's no need to necessarily ditch the tools that you have. You can marry Octopus Deploy into your existing environment, into your existing tooling to help you maybe make that complex deployment more simple. When I say that Octopus Deploy can help make your deployment process simple, that's because hopefully it will, because you use one process for actually deploying your application out. We don't have separate processes depending on whether you're deploying to test, whether you're deploying to production, QA, whatever that may be. We can use different things like variables and scoping steps inside the process, depending on what environment you're deploying to or what you're actually deploying as well. Hopefully, again, I'll show you some of that inside the demo and get you involved in what that actually means. We also have the traceability, so we'll be able to see the release version numbers. You might find a few releases in my environment while I've been testing this morning, but you can have that traceability of what's happening. You can quickly see if your production environment's on version 1.0.2 versus your test environment, which is maybe on 0.0.2, and you can understand where your environments are and how they differentiate from each other. Although we're focusing on making your deployment simplified, we can also do those advanced deployment patterns that you may have to implement in your environment, whether that be something like rolling deployments or blue-green deployments or canary deployments, or if you're going a bit more complex into the multi-tenancy environments, we can focus all on that for you and help you with that as well. So there's lots of capabilities to dive in here with Octopus Deploy and just make that deployment simplified for yourself. Now, in terms of deploying your infrastructure, we can use something called Runbooks inside Octopus Deploy. On the slide, it will say that it allows your teams to automate routine maintenance and incident management tasks, but that's only a small part of what Runbooks can do for you. I love Runbooks in terms of building out my infrastructure, building out test environments, production environments, ripping them down when I don't need them, and having that automation process there so that I don't have to sit and do next, or fill in a GUI in order to answer those forums. But it can also do simple tasks such as going through all of my virtual machines in my environment and applying Windows updates to them, or updating all of the software using Windows Package Manager or Chocolatey. It can carry out some of those automation tasks. Again, if you haven't touched an environment for a while and you need to update it, you can automate all of that with Runbooks. The power is there to help you automate your tasks and those mundane tasks with Runbooks as well from an operations or infrastructure point of view. Now, the team at Octopus pride themselves in being API first. So often a lot of new features will start with the API, and they'll start from building up there, and they'll start to build the GUI on top of that API. We also have a command line tool. So if you are not familiar with APIs, or you don't like interacting with them, sometimes I don't like interacting with APIs, there is a command line tool that can help you and is a lot easier sometimes than trying to figure out how to pull or get or post with an API command. However, saying that, a recent project I actually worked on was using PowerShell scripting and the API for Octopus to actually create this script that I can trigger using my Elgato Stream Deck. So I have an Elgato Stream Deck, which is a piece of kit that sits on my desk that has buttons on it, and I can configure them to do certain tasks. A couple of my buttons actually trigger some runbooks to deploy test environments for me inside Azure. And that just is a big old PowerShell script that calls a lot of the API from Octopus Deploy, so that I don't have to pull up a browser, have to log into it, have to pull up the certain part of it and click those buttons. I can just hit the button on my Stream Deck. So there are some really cool things that you can do, combining things that you enjoy, maybe have on your desk, and using the API as well. So I love the fact that Octopus is stretching me to learn new things and get outside of my comfort zone, even if it is just to make my job a lot easier. Now, as I said, we're going to be focusing on building a CI/CD pipeline for the Octo Pet Shop website and deploying it out. I had some fun using PowerPoint and drawing out that CI/CD pipeline. The design department will probably be cringing because of my artwork, and they'll probably be able to do it much better. But I thought this was pretty cool, being able to draw something and then have it kind of build back out in my slides. So what we're going to be focusing on and what we're going to try and build for Octo Pet Shop is being able to pull down the code and work on it locally on our laptop, on our workstation. We'll then commit the code into our source control repo, which is an Azure DevOps repo. The Azure DevOps pipeline will be monitoring that repo, and then it will start to build out the code depending on the steps that we have put into that pipeline. It will push the artifacts to Octopus, which is ultimately a .zip file in our case. And then Octopus will deploy that out to our test infrastructure and our production infrastructure. And hopefully that will mean that we get, good source control and a good process for having a repeatable process and being able to push code and test it and see what's happening in it as well. Now, I've spoke a lot and showed you a lot of slides. So let's dive into the demo part and hope that everything is working as it should be. So here is my Azure DevOps environment. And again, I'm sure a few of you will be familiar with this environment, but let's just take a look for those that might not be. Down the left-hand side, we have the menu, and we can interact with our space, our area, our project inside Azure DevOps. We have our boards, where if we click on that, we'll see we have a bunch of tasks that we are wanting to work through and are our backlog, or we have issues for the website. We're actually going to address the copyright date issue tonight, hopefully, fingers crossed, if the demo gods and Azure DevOps is not having issues like it has been unfortunately this afternoon. But this is the workboard where we can interact, we can add tasks onto it, we can claim tasks if we want to work on them, or we can just report on what's happening and just keep that all going and in that environment. Inside the repo part, we have all of our code. This is where the source code of the application and also our infrastructure lives. Now, it's a .NET application. It's a .NET Core 6.0. I think we're running this version of app. Now, as I said at the very start, I'm not a developer, so a lot of this goes over my head. I can do simple changes inside the code. Hopefully, we'll be demoing that tonight for you. But this is where all of the code for this website lives, and being able to source code it. And I can pull that down to my local machine and work on it from there. What else we have in terms of the pipeline? We also have the pipeline that takes that code once there's a code change and works through it. If we have a look at a previous release, it will show us the different stages that we have. And I think this is probably easier than having a look at the YAML pipeline. So What we have here is various different steps that help us get this application ready for deployment through Octopus Deploy. So we go through some .NET steps. So we restore, we build, we test the code, we publish the various different parts of the code, and then we package it up for the for pushing to Octopus. And we're packaging this up into .zip files to push over to Octopus. We then collect some metadata from inside Azure DevOps to push into Octopus for us and make sure that we have all of that information in Octopus in case we need that. And then last but not least, we push those packages, so those new zip files, into our Octopus instance and get them ready for deployment. So if we head over to our Octopus environment, we can have a look at what's over in this setup. Now, inside here, you'll see that we have the menu system at the top. So let's just enlarge this so you get a full screen. So up the top is your menu system for Octopus Deploy, and you can see there's various different menus that you can interact with. When you're setting up a brand new Octopus space, the first thing you'll have to do is kind of go into the infrastructure and accounts. Now, we have linked our Azure subscriptions to Octopus already. So Octopus has full rights to stop instances, to delete instances, to create, fully interact with our Azure subscription as we need it to. I'm not going to show you how to do that because you'll get some of my credentials, but basically you can add in your Azure subscription, your AWS connection, your DCP, or even your on-prem connection as well to servers. It doesn't have to be a cloud account that you're attaching to this. Once you've got that connection to your environment, to your infrastructure, what you need to set up next is what we call inside Octopus is environments. Now this relates to maybe what you want to call as your life cycle for your process. So we have a test environment for Octopet Shop, and we also have a production environment. You may have more. If you have a QA or a dev or even just something else in that life cycle, you would add all of those in here. But as you can see, we've already created the test environment and we've created our production environment, which is all we need for Octopet Shop because we want to introduce that test environment that they currently don't have, and we want to try and keep costs at a minimum for them because they are just a small pet shop. So once we've done that, we want to start to think about deploying our infrastructure out to the environment so that we can start to package up the code and push that out to that. So what I do is I use Runbooks, as I said before. I like the Runbooks for automating the deployment of multiple different environments. I have a runbook here called Bicep Create Infrastructure, which, as from the name, you can see actually helps me create my infrastructure using Azure Bicep templates. Now, I built this process up and it's 5 stages long. The first stage is just to create the Azure resource group. So if we have a quick look inside this, we can see we've configured various different things to happen, but ultimately all that's running is an Azure CLI command to create that resource group. We're pulling in some parameters, some variables that we've configured for the location and the resource group name, and that runbook will kick off that step and create our Azure resource group. The next step actually takes some PowerShell and deploys out my Azure Bicep templates. Now, if we have a quick look at the code, it's taking our Azure Bicep files that we have stored and it's then deploying them out. Now, if you've ever used Azure Bicep, you'll be a bit familiar with this. And I know there was a great session from Azure Thursday, I can't remember when it was, about Bicep templates from Esther and Freak. So definitely check that out if you haven't, because that has really helped me with my Azure Bicep template learning as well. Basically, this step takes our Azure Bicep templates, which are a nested template collection, and deploys out our infrastructure for us. I've already ran it for the test environment, so that's already done. What we're going to kick off tonight, so you can see it, is the production one. Now, after our infrastructure has been deployed using the Azure Bicep templates, we have 3 steps here that register those new bits of infrastructure that we've actually deployed out. What this actually does is tell Octopus that there's new deployment targets, there's new infrastructure that we can use to actually deploy out to it. So we have this web app, or 3 web apps in this case, that we can deploy out our code to, and we'll see that when we start to build out the deployment instance. If we click Run, we can select the environment that we want to do this to. So I've already done test earlier on today, so I want to do production. So if we click Run, that will go off and it will start to deploy all of that for us. If we have a quick look back inside infrastructure and then click inside the test environment, we have those test web apps already registered for us. So we can see they're already deployed and they're already connected to Octopus Deploy, ready for us deploying our source code out to them. And if we quickly have a check inside Azure, we can see inside the resource group here, those bits are there for us. So we've got the 3 web apps, and we have the Azure SQL server as well, and the app service plan all ready for us. So if we have a look at our code now, we have the code stored on our repository on our machine locally, and I want to walk you through some of the different bits that we have here. So we have this front web end page which has the copyright date as 2018, and we want to change that. So let's make that small change. So if we change that to 2022 and update that properly, and we save that. Let me double check I have the right code pulled down locally. So we have the right code. So I've made that change. So I've got 2022 here, and what I want to do is sync that change up into my Azure repo so that it can kick off a pipeline for us. So we'll do changed date on front web app. Now I'm also going to reference the issue that was logged, and that's issue number 16, because that will help us link those issues, and it will show us within the commit message and in that actual issue within DevOps that we've actually made a change and we've done something to that. So if we click save to that and sync our changes, those will go up into our Azure DevOps repo, and it should kick off the pipeline, all being well. I did have a small issue this afternoon because Azure DevOps had an outage, so fingers crossed it's working for us. Let's go back in and have a quick look just to see if it has kicked off. Yep, it has kicked off. So we can leave that running in the background, and what we want to do is actually build the pipeline that will deploy the code once it's pushed into Octopus by Octopus. So if we go into our Octo Pet Shop job, we can see that create infrastructure for our production environment is still running away in the background. But what we are going to have a look at here is deployments. This is the part inside Octopus where you'll actually define the process for deploying your code base out to your actual environment or infrastructure, in our case, our web apps. So if we click on define the deployment process and click add step, we're confronted by what we call step templates inside Octopus. These are either created by people inside Octopus, so we have curated a lot of these steps, or by community members, and you can contribute to these too if you see something that isn't there. These just help you make it easier when you actually want to do something. If you're trying to, deploy a resource to Azure, or in our case, we'll be deploying some packages out to an Azure web app, they give us something that we can work through. We don't have to know necessarily how all of that works. We can just walk through the step template. So if we have a look at this, so we have to create 4 different things. So we have to deploy a package to configure a database, and then we have to deploy the various code to our web apps. So the first stage we want to do is package. So let's search for package. Now you could search, or you can look through the different menu systems to get this. We're going to deploy a package to configure our database. So if we say database, And hopefully I can type live for everybody watching. The first step that we want to configure, or the first stage that we want to configure here, is configuring targets in the role. So we want to deploy this step out to our database server. However, we don't recommend that you connect your database server to Octopus directly. We always say use a jump box or a bastion box to connect between Octopus and your database, just from a security point of view. That's what we recommend that you do. So we're going to click Bastion because we have that jump box or that Bastion box set up already, which is ultimately just a Windows server sitting inside our Azure environment as well. And it will connect to our SQL Server and deploy out the configuration that needs to happen to it. For the package, we are going to pick the database one. So there's various different parts to this application that's been made. Part of it is for the configuration of the database. Now, there's no other stage or step that we need to configure in this, so we'll click Save to save that, and we'll click Add a Step. Now, we want to deploy out to an Azure Web App, so we want to deploy an Azure Web App stage here. So let's start this off. Now we have the option here to actually use what's called a worker or a worker pool. If you've ever used Azure DevOps before, you'll be familiar with this term being called an agent. So the agent that kicks off your jobs inside Azure DevOps is what we call a worker or a worker pool. If you've used GitHub Actions, you'll know that as a runner. So those runners carry out your jobs or your tasks for you. Again, we call it worker here inside Octopus. Now we have some hosted. So the hosted Windows and the hosted Ubuntu ones are ones that we spin up inside our cloud infrastructure, and they are spun up when you need them on demand and then shut down when they're idle. Or you could have your own. So I have my own pool of Windows servers sitting in the background with all of the necessary bicep tooling, Azure CLI, Azure PowerShell, you name it, the tools installed on this server so that I can carry out these steps. So I'm going to click on the Windows worker pool, and it will help me carry out this stage. Now we're doing the product service part of the code, so we want to deploy this out to our deployment target that's for that product service. Now again, we can leave pretty much all of these steps configured. We don't need to touch them, but you could, if you were using deployment slots in your web app, you would obviously input some details here, but we don't need to because we're not using that here. However, we do want to add in some additional features. Inside our .NET application, there's a file called appservices.json that you can use to actually configure different parts of your application. So using variables outside of your application, this app settings file can pull them into them. Again, I'm not a developer. This has been explained to me and showed me that this is how you need to do a .NET and how you need to change some of the variable replacements inside your application. Again, if you're not doing .NET development, you probably don't need to do this, but it's just something that I've learned. And I've also learned that if you spell this wrong, then your whole deployment can fail because it can't find the file if you spelt it incorrectly, as you would assume. So let's check. I'm putting in the appsettings.json, and hopefully I have spelled that correctly. So I'll click Save. Now that's 2 of my steps inside this deployment process created. If I click Add, we want to do another one. So another web app to be configured. So again, let's give it a name to product. No, sorry, we're doing the shopping cart. Now this step is almost identical to what the one we did before. So we'll pick the worker location again as Windows. This time when we're deploying out, we're going to pick the shopping cart. And we'll also pick the package for the shopping cart service. And again, we need to add in these additional steps to help us do some transformations inside our app using variables. I'll make sure I spell it correctly. If we scroll down, we have some condition settings that we can have per stage. Now, I want to run this job in parallel with the previous step. So I'm happy for this job or this step to actually happen at the same time as the previous one. Now, this can cause some issues depending on how your app is and depending on the load on your system to actually carry this out. So I know that this is fine to run, but you would probably have to do some testing in your environment in order to understand if you can run the 2 steps or multiple steps at the same time. Now we have one more step to add in, and that's for our front end. So let's get that configured. So again, it's identical to the previous ones. We're going to pick the Windows worker pool. This time we're going to pick the web deployment because we're deploying to the front end. Again, pick the web code and we will add in these additional settings. And app settings.json. And again, I'm quite happy with this step to run at the same time as the previous one because I know it doesn't cause any issues with the deployment. Now that's our deployment pretty much done. However, there are other options that we have available to us. So for example, if you were looking to notify your team inside Slack, you could actually post out some kind of message into a Slack channel or a team inside there. Equally, we could do it with Teams. So again, if you're using Microsoft Teams, you can post that into a channel there and notify people about it. Or you could use email. There's various different communications methods that you can add into this step so that if people aren't using Octopus or you have a lot of automation throughout all of this process and you want to notify the team what's happening, whether that be a success, whether it be a failure, then you can also do that. We're looking at in the future integrating with ServiceNow so that you can integrate these notifications inside service tickets for your service desk to action and pass on to the relevant team and have that notification for you. So there's various different things that you can do. We've kept it very simple with this demo just to kind of show you the art of the possible. However, there is one step that I do want to show you, and that's the manual intervention step. What this step will do for us is actually stop the process at some point where we configure it so that we can have that human element added into this automation process. There are times where you probably want a human to double check that you're deploying your code or you're kicking off a deployment to your infrastructure. That might just be that extra check. Again, rolling out to production is always scary and you should have checks in place before you do it. This manual intervention step will stop the process and force someone, a human being, to go and click a button and say that it's okay to actually do that deployment. I want this for my production environment. I'm happy for people to push out to test whenever they want, but I want to have that manual intervention so that there's a double check or a sanity check that goes in place before it goes out to production. Now, you can put in instructions around what that person has to check. Maybe they have to go and check that a change request has been put in, that certain tests have passed okay, whatever it may be. I'm going to put in, let's say, are you okay for this to simple test, a simple question for that person. Now you can configure this to set to one person, to a team of people to actually push the manual override button and allow the deployment to go through. Because I'm on my own and I've got no one else to tech with tonight, I'm just going to configure this as everyone. So everyone inside my organisation can push this deployment out. But that's probably not best practice in real life, so don't follow my example. Use me as a very bad example. Now, the conditions allow us to configure what happens and when this will happen. I only want this to happen inside my production process, so I click on Run Only for specific environments and click Production. So it'll only run in production. It won't happen when test is kicked off. Again, we just want the production environment just that wee bit more safe in terms of pushing out to it. Now you'll probably see here, we have the manual intervention step at the very bottom of the process, which is not the ideal place for it. So we want to move that up by clicking on the ellipsis and reordering the steps. If we drag this up to the top and click Done and click Save, we now have everything ready for our deployment out to our infrastructure. So what we want to do is click on Releases and create a release. Now we could actually have this configured so that our Azure DevOps pipeline actually configures this release for us. So the Azure DevOps pipeline can build all the software, can push the packages, create a release, and actually then deploy it out to our test environment. We could have that all automated for us if we wanted. I'm keeping it a bit manual so that I can walk you through some of the processes this evening. I would click Save here to kickstart this release, and then I would pick Deploy to Test. Now I have the option here to trigger it when it wants to happen. So you can either pick it to happen now, or you can happen later. So you could have it going out at 3 AM in the morning on a Saturday morning if you were feeling brave and you were happy for that to happen. I'm going to set now so that we can have a look at this actually kicking off. Now you'll see it will start to look at the packages, so it'll start to grab a copy of the packages that we've pushed over from Azure DevOps and then start to deploy that out to it. We can click on Task Log and have a look at what's happening in the background. Now we have various different levels what we can configure it to. So we can have just the info level, or we can have it going verbose and giving us a lot of information here around what it's doing. We can see here it's connected to our database. And it's used a username and password that we can't see because it's a sensible variable, and it's deployed it out, and going by the green kind of colouring, it's successfully done that stage. So we'll let that kick off because it takes a few minutes, and what we'll do is have a look at, let me see, my screen's being a bit weird here. If we have a look inside the configuration menu, we can see various different things that we can configure or have a look at. We could configure that SMTP server if we were sending out emails during our deployment process. You would have to configure that. We have RBAC configuration, so we have rules here where we can give people different access using either their user permissions or some built-in team permissions that we have, or you can create your own. What's pretty cool is the audit log, though. There's a lot of information collected in the background every time we interact with Octopus, whether that just be logging in and having a look, or if we're kicking off a deployment. As you can see here, I kicked off that deployment and it's logged that information for me. It's also logged various different things that have been happening in the background as well. It's pretty cool to be able to pull out of this information, whether you're in an audit situation or you're trying to troubleshoot why something has happened and maybe who did it. Not necessarily to point the finger, but to just see what's happening inside your environment and have a look at it. If you were to delete things, say you deleted this whole project, that whole Octopus or Octopet Shop project inside this environment, you would still have a log of it. You're not deleting those audit logs with it. So even if you delete everything that you've done, everything that we did tonight, the audit log would still have a registration of all of that for you. So there's a good audit trail in terms of having a look and making sure everything is happening and when it happens. Now let's have a look and see if this deployment has kicked off. So yes, it has. So a big green tick shows us that this release has actually happened and been successful to our environment. So let's see if we can find the front end of it and have a look at it. Now, this is an Azure web app, so it's actually really responsive. Usually they're quite slow. If we zoom in, we can see that we've changed the name. So the date is no longer saying 2018, it's now saying 2022. It's showing us that we have the version 0.0.1, which was our release number. So if you were eagle-eyed and saw that release number, you'll see that it was running, the release was version 0.0.1, and we're showing that inside the website. And it's also running inside our test environment. So we have a kind of indication there. And those are pulling in variables from Octopus as well, and showing you that transforming inside of your application due to that app settings.json file, and again the configuration of the app. Now what we can do now that we are happy for it to be running inside test is click deploy to production, and we can kick that off as well. So that'll now kick off, and the manual intervention step has automatically kicked in, because we said we only wanted manual intervention for production environments. Now, I probably wouldn't be in a production environment being the person to push the code and push it out to production. I would probably have a colleague check it. However, as I said, I'm on my own tonight, so let's click Assign to Me and see what happens. It shows me that instruction, so that question that I typed in during the deployment process, it's saying, are you okay to happen? Now, you don't have to type anything in, but for good practice, then yes, you want to probably put in some kind of answer or notes around why you're saying yes to this, or even why you're saying no to this deployment. I'll click on Proceed, and what will happen is after a few seconds, the job will kick off and it'll start to push out to production for us. And there you go, it's kicked off and it's starting to do that for us. Now, let me check and see if we have a look at release. I don't think the release notes have actually pushed through. So that's a bit disappointing. My demo has been sometimes working and sometimes not, but it should have had release notes there about my commit message, and it should have shown me the issues that I was solving inside Azure DevOps. But it has been playing up today, so unfortunately that hasn't worked. I'm guessing I've done too well with the demo that if only one thing breaks, then it has to be that thing. Hopefully that's shown you a bit around the process and explained some of those concepts and diagrams that I showed you. Let's just go back to my slides and summarise what we've went through. So we introduced new infrastructure hosted in Azure using Azure Bicep templates to deploy that. We introduced a test environment for the Octo Pet Shop team. We also introduced source control by storing all of our source code inside Azure DevOps repo. We introduced a CI/CD pipeline using Azure DevOps and Octopus Deploy. And hopefully we've introduced a really stable and repeatable and cost-effective solution for Octo Pet Shop all in for them as well, and solved all of those issues that they identified to us at the start of this evening. Now, if there's any kind of call to action that I want to give you all this evening is please do sign up for a trial for Octopus Deploy. As I said, I've been here for 6 months and I have truly enjoyed loving trying the product out, getting to know it, getting to configure it, seeing lots of successes with my deployments. I've also learned tons by breaking it and having to start from scratch again and seeing all those failures. But I guess hands-on learning is a great thing to do, and I learn best through that. So definitely sign up for a trial, have a look. If you've got any questions, if you've got any concerns, please do reach out to me. But again, if I've leaving you with anything this evening, please do have a go with Octopus Deploy and see how easy it is to try and do that deployment process. And last but not least, my contact details are on screen. Please do reach out to me. I've put together some resources and also a copy of my slide deck if you wanted that this evening, and you can get that link on screen as well. So yeah, hopefully this has all been useful to you and I haven't just rambled on, but if we've got any questions, yeah, now is the time. Hopefully the team back in the studio can tell me if there is any questions or not.
Yes, actually we do, and thank you for your session, Sarah. Welcome back to the studio. Yeah, it was a great session, and actually we have some questions for you, so I hope you can answer them. So the first question was from the YouTube from Xing Wu, and he's asking if it's possible to script your deployment process in Octopus Deploy and then reuse that same deployment process in another project by adjusting the parameters.
Yes, so there's a couple of ways you can do that. We have what's called import-export, so you can package that process up and then import it into different projects or different instances of Octopus. I do that quite a bit, so as I take my demos a few times with me and copy them. Alternatively, we do have a new preview feature called Config as Code, where your deployment will actually be written out to code and stored in, say, GitHub or Azure DevOps repo or some kind of Git repo like that, and it'll be stored inside that. So you could take that code and then put that into another repo, attach it to an Octopus space and take that with you. So there's multiple ways of doing it depending on what you're using, but I love that import-export feature. It's super easy to copy and paste ultimately things from one space to another space inside Octopus.
Great. Well, I think that answers his question, right? So
Perfect.
you have another question?
Yes. So I got very excited about the whole GUI interface that you offer, because I think personally that it will definitely help operators, or at least the admins that are have a more ops background, to ease up into the whole development workflows. But one of the things that I'm noticing right now is that we also want to onboard customers and give them the option to, for instance, start like part of a pipeline. And I know within Azure DevOps, we can give them very granular access to that one pipeline. And I was wondering if we can do the same or build like a form in front of it, because you already explained it's also API driven. If that allows us to have other teams benefit from the pipelines that we're building.
You should be able to, either, like you said, with RBAC controls, with the role-based access, limit people down to whether it be read access. Everybody this evening can actually see what I did and has read access to that, so you can go and check my workings and copy it. But you should be able to do that. You should be able to do it either through the role-based, or like you said, if you are very good at interacting with APIs, you probably could put some kind of form in front of it and then make some changes. Again, because we're also doing the config as code, you probably could, like you say, put a form in front of it. Someone who's maybe not familiar with writing YAML or any of that kind of good stuff, they can answer a form and then you can have it configured. So there's probably a lot of things you can do if you know how, in terms of making it friendly for those that are not IT literate or aren't great with YAML or things like that, like myself.
Or the persons that don't have the Stream Deck at home.
Yes.
Because you basically got me sold when you told me that it's Stream Deck supportable. So yeah.
Yeah, so I think I have one final question for you, and that is whether you can mix and match your environment. Like, can you deploy partially to IaaS, partially to PaaS from one in the same pipeline, from one connection?
Yes.
And how does that work with the tentacles?
Yes, you could, absolutely. I used all PaaS services for that deployment this evening, but you could have some PaaS services and then a Windows server with IIS sitting in the background. The connection from Octopus to, say, Azure or AWS uses the credentials that you've given, so it uses that kind of identity methodology. I'm sure there's more fancy words to say that, but basically those connections interact with your PaaS services. If you're using services like a Windows server or a Linux server, you have to install the Octopus tentacle on that. That's just a small application you can either install using Chocolatey or Windows Package Manager, or you could download the MSI and do it manually. But then that tentacle application would then do the connection back to Octopus. But there's nothing to say that you couldn't be deploying out to a piece of PaaS infrastructure and then deploying out to a legacy server, a Windows server, whatever it may be. There's nothing to stop you there. I just did the demo on PaaS because it was easier and quicker to demo for you this evening.
Yeah. So you can mix those kind of environments into one in the same pipe. I know that the tentacle is still one of those official extensions, right, on the Azure VMs. I think you can install it right from the extension pane.
I think so. Yes, I think so. Yes.
All right. Well,
I think you won him back, Sarah.
Good.
I will sign up for the trial again and tingle around a little bit. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, so thank you very much for being here this evening, for celebrating your new MVP status with us. And, well, I guess it's time. Let me double check. Well, it's time for a very short bio break for those of you who might need it. Some of you know that I usually am the one that needs it. But we'll be back in 2 minutes and then introduce you to Kendall.
Yep,
Thank you
Sarah.
very much, Sarah.